He's regarded as one of the greatest shooters of his era, which speaks more to his work ethic and commitment to his craft. As coming off of a great career at Ohio State, one of the last things he was known for was his shooting. He was a great slasher and finisher, and had some playmaking and defensive ability. But by the time he ended his career, he was remembered first and foremost for his lights-out shooting, which enabled him to be one of the great underrated scorers of the 21st century. It took some time for him to get his chance in Milwaukee, but once he got his chance, he put together a dominant 4-year stretch that saw him improve every year and be named an All-Star. Yet surprisingly, only named an All-Star once. He looked to be approaching his peak by year 7, and was putting together some incredible performances. But it would all come crashing down a couple seasons later after a severe knee injury. Then less than a year after that, he would re-injure the same knee just as severely. After this, he would never get close to approaching the level of play he had been at prior to the injury. But he stayed loyal and humble throughout, and worked his way back multiple times. He spent nearly his entire career with some bad Milwaukee teams, and never really had any playoff success. But he did everything he could to keep those teams afloat. He didn't have the flashy dunks in his repertoire like some of the better remembered wings of his generation, but his shooting and off-the-ball play was just as pretty. And although Michael Redd may not have been a household name, he was going to make sure you knew who he was by the end of the game. And hopefully today's episode will shed a little bit more light on his name and his game. Let's jog your memory. A Columbus native, Michael Redd attended West High School in Columbus. While at West, Redd would be one of the top players in the state by his senior year, as he was reportedly a top 5 recruit and would be named second team All-State. During his senior year, he was recruited by local Ohio State University and would eventually commit to stay home and become a Buckeye. However, when Redd signed, he was committing to a team coached by Randy Ayers. But little did he know, after a 10-17 season, Ayers would be out, and come time for Redd's freshman season, his new coach would be Jim O'Brien. So the Buckeyes hadn't been great in 97, and it also didn't help that going into 98, their 2 best scorers in Damon Stringer and Sean Stonerook were gone. So even though they had lost some talent, it gave Redd an opportunity to step in as a freshman, which he would do seamlessly. The team as a whole, understandably, would be going through a transition year under a new coach without some of their top players, as they would finish with just an 8-22 record, and would also be the worst team in the Big Ten, finishing 1-15 in conference play. But Redd would prove to be one of the brightest young stars in the nation. He would lead his team in scoring by a large margin, while also leading the team in rebounds and steals per game. But Redd wouldn't just lead his team, he would lead the conference in scoring at nearly 22 points per game, and Redd would make Big Ten history as the first true freshman to lead the conference in scoring, as he would also finish 8th in the conference in rebounding and 4th in steals. So with Redd's incredible play, he would rightfully be voted Big Ten Freshman of the Year, but an early loss in the conference tourney ended their year, as Redd averaged about 22 points, 6.5 rebounds, and 2 steals per game. Going into 1999, the Buckeyes got a big boost, as they welcomed Boston College transfer Scoonie Penn, and together, he and Redd would form an exciting backcourt duo. With the addition of Penn, Redd's scoring dropped by a couple points, but together, the backcourt would combine for over 36 points per game. And although Redd's scoring had dropped, he would shoot a career-high 46.6% and 34.1% from deep. He would finish second on the team in rebounds and 3rd in steals, but his 19.5 points would still be a top 5 mark in the conference. But with the addition of Penn, the Buckeyes' offense and defense improved greatly. They would start the year 6-0, and after 13 games had surpassed their win total from the year before, as they sat at 11-2. They would go on another 7-game win streak late in the season to finish at 22-7. They would then defeat Michigan easily in the conference quarterfinals, but would lose to Illinois in the semifinals. But at 23-8, the Buckeyes would enter the tournament as a 4 seed, as they were about to have their best tournament run in over 30 years. Redd set the tone in a first-round defeat of Murray State, as he led all scorers with 27 points on 50% shooting, while recording 3 steals and 0 turnovers. Round 2 would be a blowout defeat of Detroit Mercy. Redd and Penn tied for the team lead in scoring with 15 points, but in a game where Detroit Mercy only put up 44 points, the Buckeyes didn't need to do a lot of scoring. The Sweet 16 brought top-seeded Auburn, and Ohio State would pull off the upset, as Redd would record a double-double with 22 points and 10 rebounds, while Penn added 26 of his own, and Ohio State advanced to an Elite 8 matchup with St. John's. Redd continued his great play as he recorded 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists on over 47% shooting, as Ohio State won by 4 to make their first Final Four appearance since 1968. Unfortunately, their tournament would come to an end versus eventual national champion UConn, as Redd and Penn would both struggle in this game. Redd would lead the Buckeyes with 15 points and 8 rebounds, but would shoot less than 39% from the field, as Ohio State lost by 6. But for the regular season, Red averaged about 19.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 1.5 steals per game. Red was back for his junior season, as the Buckeyes began the year ranked number 4 in the nation. Red and Penn would combine for nearly 33 points per game, with Red leading the team in scoring, rebounding, and finishing second in steals, as Red would again finish top 5 in the conference in scoring and top 10 in rebounding. Surprisingly, Ohio State would lose to unranked Notre Dame in their first game of the year, but with a top 20 scoring defense in the nation, they were able to recover for the most part and finish the regular season at 22-5, as Red finished the year strong, putting up at least 20 points and shooting at least 50% in 6 of the final 10 games of the year. The Big Ten tournament would be a disappointment, as they would lose to Penn State in the quarterfinal, but they would enter the NCAA tournament as a 3 seed and start off with a blowout of Appalachian State. Red would play great with 21 points and 4 steals on over 56% shooting, but their tournament came to an end in the second round, as Red had a down game. He would have just 13 points on 5 of 14 shooting and foul out, as they lost to Miami by 13. And for the regular season, Red averaged about 17.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, and a steal per game. After 3 years, Red decided to forego his senior season and declare for the NBA draft. For Red, it wasn't about the money as much as it was about fulfilling a lifelong dream of playing professionally. However, another big reason for Red leaving was that he had reportedly been told that he would be going mid-first round, as he would even say that if he thought he would be a late first round or second round pick, he would have stayed. But he was confident in his stock.
43rd pick in the 2000 NBA draft, the Milwaukee Bucks select Michael Red from Ohio State University.
To his surprise, Red had not only fallen out of the first round, but hadn't been picked since closer to the middle of the second, by a Milwaukee Bucks team on the rise. They already possessed one of the best shooting guards in the league in Ray Allen, so Red was more of a low-risk, high-reward pick for the team. And surprisingly, one of the main reasons Red had fallen so much was due to concerns about his outside shooting, and head coach George Karl didn't sugarcoat in telling Red that he needed to develop his shot and his body before he would get any attention from him. So it makes sense why Red only appeared in 6 games as a rookie, and in those 6 games, he would score a total of 13 points, while missing all 3 of his attempts from long range. But the Bucks had their team in place, and finished at 50-32 to get a first-round matchup with Orlando, who they would defeat in 4 games. Charlotte would take them 7 games in round 2, but they would still win to advance to the conference finals. This would be another 7-game series versus Philadelphia, but this time, the Bucks would be on the losing end. Yet Red's rookie season would see him average about 2 points and half a rebound per game. It was during the offseason that Red really took things seriously, as he followed a rigorous training routine, which proved to work, as in his sophomore season, he was a regular part of the rotation, appearing in 67 games and even starting 8 of them. Red had reportedly been demanding Karl's attention through his intense play in practice about halfway through his rookie year, but now with the improvements he made over the summer, he was earning his respect, as teammate Sam Cassell would even give him the label of being a shooter, which Red would joke as being a foreign concept to him. But there was no doubt he was quickly becoming one of the league's young up-and-comers. In year 2, he would hit double figures in 42 games, including 7 games with at least 20, and was doing so on over 48% from the field and over 44% from deep, with the highlight of his year coming in a February 20th blowout of Houston, when Red scored 26 points and hit 8 threes in the 4th quarter alone to set a then NBA record for threes in a quarter, as he would finish the game with a career-high 9 made threes. And one more thing Red was showing was his value in the clutch, as he would hit a last-second 3 to force a second overtime versus New York on January 26th, and then a week later would hit another 3 in the final seconds of a game versus Philadelphia to bring the Bucks within 3. But both these games would be losses, as Milwaukee took a step back this year. Behind the scenes, there was significant conflict between Karl and players like Glenn Robinson and Anthony Mason. And reportedly, there was even a bit of a feud brewing between the team's top 2 players, in Robinson and Allen. So with such a dysfunctional team, the Bucks only managed a 41-41 record and missed the playoffs. But for the regular season, Red averaged about 11.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. An off-season arrest of Glenn Robinson would be the nail in the coffin for his time in Milwaukee, as he would be traded in early August to the Hawks, for a package including forward Tony Kukoc. So with Robinson gone, that meant a bigger role for Red, but with Allen still manning the 2-guard, Red wouldn't be starting just yet. Tim Thomas would fill the starting small forward spot, while Kukoc and Red provided most of the scoring off the bench. Red was again improving, as he was now getting over 28 minutes per game in a 6th-man role, but the Bucks just lacked chemistry, And later reports came out that Allen and Carl were also feuding during this season. And as the years had gone on, Red had been developing into a very similar player to Allen, as he had an all-around scoring ability, but was now a lethal shooter and a great off-the-ball player. So with the team sitting at just 27 and 26, a blockbuster trade occurred that saw Allen as the main piece in a deal sent to Seattle for their franchise legend Gary Payton. Yet even with Allen gone, Red still hadn't cracked the starting lineup, as the Bucks elected to run a backcourt featuring Cassell and Payton. But Red would still play in all 82 games this year while starting 14 of them, as he would finish third in the NBA in made threes and second in three-point percentage. He would have 65 games in double figures and 6 double-doubles, as well as his first career 30-point game, when he had 35 on nearly 59% shooting in a December 9th win versus Cleveland. With their new backcourt, the Bucks finished the year at 42 and 40, which was enough to squeak into the playoffs, where they would get New Jersey in round 1. Red would have a postseason debut to forget, as he would have 11 points on less than 42% shooting in Game 1, which would end up being one of his best games of the series, as over the next 4 games, he would fail to crack double figures while shooting 33% or less in each game. His best performance would come in Game 6, when he had 20 points on 7 of 11 from the field, but this would end in a blowout loss, which would end their season. But for the regular season, Red would average about 15 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. But going into Red's 4th season, he would finally get the opportunity he was waiting for. Part of the reason Payton had been traded initially was because he was in a contract year and wanted a sizable deal, so he would test free agency and start the 04 season with the Lakers. Additionally, a day after selecting TJ Ford in the 03 draft, Milwaukee would trade Cassell to the T-Wolves. GM Ernie Grunfeld would step down shortly after the draft, as Larry Harris would be hired to replace him. But throughout Grunfeld's time there, he had been a big Carl supporter. So with a new GM in Harris, he decided to move on from Carl in July and hire Terry Porter as his replacement. So now Michael Red had a lot more responsibility this season. He would be a full-time starter in 04, playing and starting all 82 games. The team's best scorers to start the year were Red, Tim Thomas, and a player who had come over in the Payton trade in Desmond Mason. But about halfway through the year, right around the trade deadline, Thomas was traded to New York for Keith Van Horn. So Red was one of the few constants on the team and responded with his best season to date. He would record double figures in all but 2 games while scoring 40 on 2 different occasions, and would also have 7 games with at least 4 threes. His efficiency had dropped, but that was to be expected, as he was taking nearly 6 more shots per game than last year and was still shooting at more than respectable rates. And his 21.7 points per game would be good for 10th in the league. And the work Red had done and patience he had showed over the years was rewarded, as he received his first career All-Star selection, scoring 13 points in the game. Milwaukee had a top 5 scoring offense, but a bottom 10 scoring defense, which would result in a 41-41 finish. Yet this would get them the 6th seed and a first-round matchup with Detroit. Red would play better, but not great in his second career postseason, as although he led his team with 18 points per game, he did so on 41% from the field and 30% from deep. However, he was the primary focus of a Detroit Pistons team who featured one of the most dominant defenses of all time, so his struggles are a bit more understandable. The Pistons would win in 5 games, but in the Bucks' lone Game 2 win, Red had his best game of the series, as he went for 26 points while going 4 of 7 from beyond the arc. And for the regular season, he would average about 21.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. 05 would be a contract year for Red, and his re-signing was top priority for Milwaukee, so they would ship Van Horn to the Mavs around the trade deadline for expiring contracts and cash. The Bucks had also made a great offseason signing when they picked up restricted free agent Mo Williams after the Jazz wouldn't match the offer, as they needed a new starting point guard after Ford had suffered a career-threatening back injury midway through last season, which would keep him out of the entire 05 season. Red and Mason formed a nice duo in Milwaukee, as the two combined for over 40 points per game, as Red had again improved his scoring and would even shoot at a slightly better rate while doing so, as his 23 points per game would be 11th in the league. He would hit double figures in 71 of the 75 games he played in, as he went for 30 on 14 different occasions, while again making at least 4 threes in 7 games. But with priority being to keep cap space open for Red, the Bucks didn't have the greatest roster, as they would finish the year at just 30-52 and miss the playoffs, as Red would average about 23 points, 4 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. But Red was a free agent, and it turns out there was one other team that almost got him. When it was all said and done, Red would re-sign with the Bucks for 6 years and around $90 million. The Bucks also hoped they had improved their chances of re-signing Red by drafting Andrew Bogut first overall, But there was a time where Red was seriously considering going back to his home state and joining another homegrown star in LeBron James by signing with Cleveland. Money definitely played a part, as the Cavs didn't want to lose another player to free agency in Zydrunas Ilgauskas, and because of this, they could only offer Red about 5 years, $70 million. But as Red would say years later, it came down to loyalty. He wanted to stay loyal to Milwaukee, who was the team that took a chance on him and spent years developing him, before trusting him to be the franchise player, and that this loyalty was more important than chasing a championship at the time. So going into 2006, Milwaukee fans were happy to have kept their star. The Bucks were trying to build something, as Ford was back as their starter, with Williams providing a great scoring punch off the bench. They added some shooting to their bench as well in Charlie Bell, who had been playing overseas for the past few years, and they would also sign forward Bobby Simmons after a breakout year with the Clippers. Bogut was joined in the front court by Jamal Magloire, while the entire team was led by new head coach Terry Stotts. But Red was without question the star of the team, as he continued his improved play and continued to up his scoring in every year of his career. And this year he would play and start in 80 games while finishing as a top 10 scorer in the league at over 25 points per game, as he would also be top 15 in made threes and minutes per game. But even with more shots and more scoring, his efficiency continued to improve, as he shot 45% from the field and nearly 40% from deep, as well as a career-high 87.7% from the free throw line. He would hit double figures in every game he played, recorded 63 games with at least 20, 20 games with at least 30, and 3 games with at least 40, while recording at least 4 threes in 11 games. The Bucks had a middle-of-the-pack offense and defense, and would hover around 500 all year, as they would finish the season at 40 and 42. Yet this was still enough for the final playoff spot, where they would take on a dominant Detroit team. Red himself would have a dominant series, but he couldn't do it all, as Milwaukee lost in 5. Red would have a rough start with 11 points on 4 of 15 shooting in a Game 1 loss, but would then put up 29 on over 55% shooting in a Game 2 loss. He would will Milwaukee to a Game 3 blowout win, as he dropped his postseason career high of 40 points on 14 of 21 from the field and 4 of 5 from deep. Game 4 would be another great performance, with 33 on 10 of 17 shooting, but the Bucks would again lose. Then Game 5 would end their season, as Red went for 23 points and 9 rebounds, with 8 of them being offensive, in a loss. But for the regular season, Red put up about 25.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. The Bucks had a new look and high hopes going into 2007, but injuries would completely destroy their season. A training camp injury to Simmons would keep him out for the year. With the solid play of Williams, Milwaukee would trade Ford to Toronto for second-year forward Charlie Villanueva. However, he would manage just 39 games for the Bucks this year, but the Bucks would acquire Earl Boykins in a midseason trade with Denver. So the season started with Red on a tear, playing the best basketball of his career. He opened the year with 37 points in a win versus Detroit, and then just 6 games later, on November 11th, Red had one of his signature games. As with the Utah Jazz coming to town, he would explode for a career-high 57 points on 18 of 32 from the field and 6 of 12 from deep, as he would score 25 of Milwaukee's 42 fourth-quarter points in a furious comeback that came up just short, as the Bucks lost by 2. Then, just a couple weeks later, the Bucks went into Staples Center and beat Kobe Bryant and the Lakers by 4 points, as Red took it to Kobe by putting up a stat line of 45 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, and 4 steals on 16 of 30 shooting. But then, on January 9th, Red's season was put on hold. It was announced that Red would miss 4 to 6 weeks with a knee injury, and although this wasn't thought to be too major, it would be unfortunate foreshadowing. So Red would return on February 20th, and in his next 7 games would have 3 with at least 30, which included another 50-point game when he and Ben Gordon had a duel in Milwaukee, which ended with Red scoring 52 points on 18 of 32 from the field and 8 of 13 from deep. But the game would end in a Bucks loss, which the Bucks have been doing a lot of this year, as Red's insane scoring outputs were done out of necessity to try and will one of the worst defensive teams in the league to wins. Red would only play 53 games this year, but would hit double figures in 52 of them, as he would have 15 games with at least 30, and would finish as a top 5 scorer in the league, while shooting over 46% from the field and 38% from deep. But with no chance of making the playoffs, Red played just 2 games after March 30th, before being shut down for the final 6 games of the year, as the 28-54 Bucks season was over. But for the regular season, Red averaged about 26.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Simmons was back from his injury for the 08 season, but he wouldn't play near the level he did in 06. Williams and Bogut would both show improved play, and with Red back and healthy, The three would combine to average over 54 points per game. Red again led the team, but this would be the first time in his career in which he didn't improve his scoring average. Yet his 22.7 points were still good for a top 10 finish in the league. He would appear in 72 games, starting 71 of them, as he would record double figures in 67 of them, have 47 games with at least 20, and 2 games with over 40. He wasn't quite playing at the same level as last season, and it didn't help that offseason changes had seen the Bucks go from the 10th ranked scoring offense in 2007 to 20th in 2008, while still featuring a bottom 10 defense. So the wins still weren't coming, as they finished the year at 26-56, and again missed the playoffs. But for the regular season, Red put up about 22.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. But Red would have something to celebrate over the summer, as he would suit up for the 08 Redeem team at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Red would have one of the smallest roles on the team, as he would average about 3 points in 9 minutes per game and wouldn't see the court in the gold medal game versus Spain. But the US still won, as Red could now call himself an Olympic gold medalist. Going into 2009, the Bucks had acquired Richard Jefferson from the Nets to take some of the offensive load off of Red. Yet a 3-team deal would also see Mo Williams traded to Cleveland, with the best player Milwaukee received in return being Luke Ridnour. Bogut would really start to be given the injury-prone label, as a back injury would limit him to just 36 games before he was shut down for the final 31 games of the year. But to start the season, Red and Jefferson were looking like a solid duo. They would combine to average over 40 points per game on respectable shooting. Red played the first 4 games of the season before missing the next 14 with an ankle injury. He took some time to find his groove, but come January, he was starting to feel it, as he was averaging 25 points on over 51% shooting over the 14 games. But then, during a January 24th win versus Sacramento, Red's career changed forever. During the third quarter, Red would attempt a shot and come down awkwardly on Ridnour's foot, which resulted in him tearing both his ACL and MCL in his left knee, which would end his season. The Bucks were hanging around in the playoff chase, as they were 22-25 at the time of the injury. But with the loss of Red and loss of Bogut a couple weeks later, they would go just 12-23 the rest of the way to finish at 34-48 and miss the playoffs. And Red's shortened season saw him average about 21 points, 3 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. Jefferson was gone going into 2010, but the Bucks had picked up a lightning-quick point guard when they selected Brandon Jennings in the 09 draft. Bogut would have a relatively healthy year, playing in 69 games. But what was more surprising was that Red was in the starting lineup for the season opener, and would play nearly 39 minutes and score 17 points. But a patella tendon strain would cause Red to sit out 15 of the next 18 games. He would play 13 straight games between early December and early January, but his scoring was streaky, as he had 4 games with at least 24, yet 7 games in single figures. But then on January 10th versus the Lakers, Red had the worst deja vu he could ask for. Once again, Red had torn the ACL and MCL in his left knee, as this would be the second time in less than a year, ending his season again. The Bucks were 15-19 at the time Red went down, but would rally to finish with a 46-36 record and get a first-round matchup versus the Atlanta Hawks, which they would lose in 7 games. But Red's season saw him average about 12 points, 3 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. 2011 would be the final year of Red's contract, and it was already known that GM John Hammond had a strong desire to unload his contract over the past couple years. So it was clear that this would be Red's final season, regardless of what happened or how strong he came back. This time, Red wouldn't rush back to be ready for the season opener, as instead he wouldn't even return to practice until late February, and would officially make his return on March 28th, with the Bucks sitting at 29-44. At this point, Red would just be a rotation player, as although he appeared in the remaining 10 games of the year, he would only get significant minutes in the final 4 games, once Milwaukee's playoff hopes were no more, as he would hit double figures twice in the 10 games he appeared in for a 35-47 Bucks team, who missed the playoffs. But for the regular season, Red averaged about 4.5 points, 1 rebound, and 1 assist per game. Red would be a free agent going into the 2012 lockout-shortened season, and shortly after the year began on December 29th, Red would sign a 1-year deal with Phoenix. The team was led by a 37-year-old Steve Nash, but they were no longer what they had been throughout the mid-2000s. Red would be given a solid role as he got about 15 minutes per game and would even start 2 of the 51 games he played. He would provide decent contributions and have 3 games with at least 20 points, with his best game coming on March 18th versus Houston, as he would have 25 points on 10 of 13 shooting. But the Suns were just a middle-of-the-pack team who finished at 33-33, which wouldn't be enough for the playoffs, as Red's year saw him average about 8 points, 1.5 rebounds, and half an assist per game. His year with the Suns allowed him to walk away from the game on more of his own terms. He would not be on a team for the 2013 season then would officially announce his retirement with Milwaukee in late 2013. Michael Redd had a silky smooth game and was a player who could slash and finish, pass the ball better than a lot of other two guards, and shoot the lights out, with the latter being the most impressive, as he came into the league with his shooting being his biggest weakness, and left the league known as one of its greatest shooters. He could fill it up quickly, but quietly, and next thing you know, he has 30 points. He couldn't have been a more perfect replacement for Ray Allen in Milwaukee, but played himself out of the shadow of Allen to become one of the league's most underrated stars in the mid-2000s. His work ethic was evident as he improved every year, and it's still surprising that he only made one All-Star team. But maybe that's due to spending nearly his entire career with the Milwaukee Bucks team who just weren't that good at the time. He played in a small market and never made it out of the first round, which definitely contributes to his lack of recognition nowadays. But if you flip that, he was the one bright spot in a dark period of Bucks basketball, putting up so many memorable performances while carrying the team on his back to multiple playoff appearances. There was no reason to believe he wouldn't have kept getting better, and the injury stole what should have been some of his best years. And that will always hold up as one of the bigger what-ifs of 2000s basketball. But when Michael Redd was healthy and in his prime, he made the game look so easy. But that's it for today's episode on Michael Redd. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on another Ohio State alum, or this one on a player he spent his first couple years in Milwaukee with. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.